In the glow of gaslight, London believed it had found the future. Bottles gleamed on every shelf. Science was worshipped like faith, and the men in white coats became its new priests. But beneath the polished glass and Latin labels, something was wrong. People weren't getting better. They were disappearing. Women grew pale from their beauty tonics. Children fell silent after a teaspoon of medicine, and no one could explain why, yet the city kept trusting. Because progress never lies, does it? This is what happens when discovery moves faster than understanding, when doctors become gods, when healing becomes a form of harm. What was really inside those bottles? How many lives were lost in the name of science? And how did London's greatest minds create one of the deadliest chapters in medical history? The answers begin here. In a city where progress glittered brighter than morality, where invention raced ahead of understanding, where every new cure came wrapped in danger. London was changing. The air was thick with invention. Smoke rising from chimneys, engines pulsing through the streets, machines replacing muscle. For the first time, humanity believed it could master life itself. And nowhere was that belief stronger than in medicine. The Victorians looked at their doctors the way their ancestors had looked at priests. White coats replaced robes. Sermons became lectures on anatomy and the future. Disease, they said, was no longer God's punishment. It was a puzzle one science could solve. Every discovery seemed to prove it. Electricity could reawaken muscles. Gas could silence pain. Chemistry could turn suffering into sleep. To the people of London, the age of miracles had begun. Only now, the miracles came in bottles. The hospitals expanded. Medical schools thrived. Apothecaries lined the streets, glowing under gaslight like shrines to modernity. Inside, shelves glittered with powders and potions, labeled in elegant Latin. Each promised relief. Each promised progress, and people believed. They believed because science was new, because doctors spoke with certainty, because after centuries of plague, famine, and fear, it finally felt like humanity was in control. But control is a fragile illusion. Behind the white walls of London's hospitals, medicine was still guesswork. Doctors argued endlessly over what caused disease. They bled patients to release bad humors. They prescribed mercury to purge impurities. They injected brandy, arsenic, opium, not because it was proven, but because it was possible. Every cure was an experiment. Every patient a test. And failure was simply called fate, yet the public didn't see this. They saw confidence, not chaos. They saw glass bottles, not gravestones, because no one wanted to believe that science, the same force that built engines and telegraphs, could also destroy. The city glowed with faith in the future. Gaslight flickered against laboratory glass. The scent of chloroform floated through hospital halls. Progress was everywhere. You could smell it, touch it, drink it. But what no one knew was that this faith would soon be tested. Because in their hunger to cure, Victorian doctors had created something even more dangerous than disease itself. Hope without understanding. And that hope was about to turn deadly. Progress had a price tag. And in Victorian London, that price was hope. What began as discovery soon became a trade. The chemist's shop replaced the chapel. The salesman replaced the doctor. And medicine became a marketplace. Every street corner offered salvation. Bottles of miracle elixir. Tinctures that promised youth, vitality, cure. Names that sounded like science. Dr. Bateman's pectoral drops. Godfrey's cordial. The elixir of life. They came in colors that glowed like jewels behind glass. Red for strength, blue for calm, gold for cure. Each label written in elegant script, stamped with authority, sealed with trust. But behind the glass, there were no regulations. No ingredients list, no science, only persuasion. Doctors and quacks stood side by side, selling faith to the frightened and the sick, to the mother with a dying child, to the worker coughing blood in the factory dust, to the aging gentleman terrified of decline. For every ache, a cure, for every fear, a bottle, and for every bottle, profit. The advertisements promised everything. Restores the blood. Cures all disorders. Relieves the agonies of life. Words that glimmered on posters, newspapers, and handbills. A city under siege by optimism. Even the language of medicine changed. Cure became commerce. Experiment became endorsement. And death became good business. Some doctors joined willingly. Others stayed silent. Because in an age obsessed with progress, to question the cure was to question the future. The illusion worked. Sales soared. The empire itself ran on faith in its own medicines. From London to Calcutta, from Cape Town to Sydney, the same bottles crossed oceans, spreading not just remedies but risk. Inside them were the ingredients of disaster. Arsenic, mercury, opium, chloroform, poisons dressed as salvation. Each one trusted. Each one deadly. But the Victorians didn't yet know that. They couldn't, because in the market of miracles, truth was bad for business. And as the century pressed forward, the line between healing and harm blurred completely. The world had learned how to sell progress, but it had forgotten how to measure the cost. The Victorians believed medicine was the mark of civilization, that every discovery, every new compound, was proof humanity was evolving. But inside the glass bottles of progress, something darker was brewing, because the line between cure and poison was vanishing, arsenic, mercury, opium, chloroform, cocaine, the age's greatest discoveries, and its deadliest mistakes. Each was celebrated. Each was sold as salvation, and each left a trail of bodies behind it. Arsenic was everywhere. It whitened faces, preserved fabrics, and colored wallpaper a brilliant shade of green. Doctors praised it as a nerve tonic. Good for the complexion, good for digestion. A few drops could renew vitality. A few drops more could stop a heart. Women took it daily, unaware that beauty itself was killing them, and when the headaches came, the weakness, the trembling hands, they returned to their doctors, who prescribed more. Mercury came next. It was the physician's favorite weapon. Used to treat everything from constipation to syphilis, it was called a purifier, a way to cleanse the body of disease. But mercury doesn't cleanse. It corrodes. It eats through tissue, attacks the nervous system, and rots the gums until teeth fall from the mouth. The cure was often worse than the illness, and yet patients thanked their doctors, because they didn't die immediately. Opium was the quiet god of the age. It soothed pain, silenced grief, and dulled hunger. It was in almost every Victorian medicine chest, mixed into tonics, lozenges, even baby syrups. Mothers fed it to their infants to make them sleep. Workers took it to numb exhaustion, and slowly a city began to drift into dependence. London's silence at night was not peace. It was sedation. Chloroform offered escape from pain, but it was a gamble with death. Surgeons called it a miracle. One breath and the patient would sleep, still as stone, while knives did their work. But doses were unpredictable. Too little, and the patient screamed awake. Too much, and their hearts stopped mid-operation. Still, the public demanded it, because in a world so full of pain, even the risk of death felt merciful. And then came cocaine, the drug of confidence, a scientific blessing, used in tonics, toothache drops, and even soft drinks. Doctors hailed it as a stimulant of genius, something to sharpen the mind and elevate the spirit. It made people feel powerful, until it didn't. Each new discovery was welcomed with open arms, until its damage became impossible to ignore. But by then it was too late. The same medicines that promised control had rewritten the very idea of health. To be cured was no longer to be healed. It was simply to feel something, anything, other than pain. And so the Victorians lived in a chemical illusion. They trusted the bottle, even when it killed them. They trusted the doctor, even when he guessed. They trusted progress, even when it lied, because to doubt it, to admit that science could be deadly, was to face the truth no one wanted to see. That their faith in medicine had become the most dangerous disease of all. And there was another side to medicine the Victorians didn't see. A quieter one, hidden behind locked hospital doors and the walls of workhouse infirmaries. It was the side where progress demanded proof, and proof required flesh. The age was obsessed with discovery. To the public, doctors were heroes, men of intellect, men of science. But in the wards of London, beneath the smell of carbolic and candle wax, a different story unfolded. A story of bodies used, discarded, and forgotten, because the Victorians believed that knowledge justified the means. And the poor had no means at all, They were the city's silent subjects. The sick in charity hospitals, the orphans, the inmates, the insane. People who could not afford medicine became medicine. They were experimented on in the name of science, without consent, without mercy, and often without record. Doctors injected untested compounds to observe effects. They opened wounds to study infection. They withheld treatment to watch how disease progressed. They called it research. They called it advancement. They did not call it cruelty. In Bethlehem Hospital, Bedlam, patients were often seen as specimens, not souls. Delusions and despair became opportunities for observation. Physicians documented insanity like an experiment in behavior, while their subjects screamed in rooms that reeked of bleach and rot. In the slums, surgeons paid grave diggers to bring them fresh corpses. Anatomy schools needed bodies, and the law did not provide enough. So the dead poor were bought, stolen, and sliced open for education. What began as learning soon became industry. The black market for bodies grew alongside the medical schools themselves. Even Queen Victoria's physicians were not immune to curiosity. They experimented with chloroform on women during childbirth, without fully knowing its risks. Some lived, some didn't, but each case brought data, and data was progress. In the pursuit of understanding, doctors crossed invisible lines. The body became a puzzle to be solved, not a life to be preserved. Pain became acceptable if it revealed truth. Suffering became necessary if it advanced science. The Victorian doctor did not see himself as cruel. He saw himself as a pioneer, standing on the edge of the unknown, reaching for something beyond morality. But every breakthrough came at a human cost. Every discovery was written in someone's blood. And for every cure that saved a life, another was lost in its making. The Victorians celebrated their physicians as saviors of mankind. But behind the applause lay an unspoken question, one that still haunts medicine today. When does curiosity become corruption? When does healing turn into harm? By the end of the 19th century, London stood at the height of its power. Industry thrived, empires expanded, and medicine had become the crown jewel of progress. Hospitals gleamed with new instruments of precision. Microscopes revealed worlds no eye had ever seen. The germ theory of disease promised understanding where once there had been superstition. For the first time in history, humanity felt close to conquering death itself. But victory can be blinding. The Victorians began to worship science the way their ancestors had worshipped God. Laboratories became temples. Doctors became high priests of reason, and the syringe, the scalpel, the tonic bottle became the holy relics of a new kind of faith. They believed every answer could be found under a lens. That morality had no place in progress. That human suffering was the cost of a better world, and in that belief, medicine lost something. It lost humility. Patients no longer asked why. They asked how much. Doctors no longer asked should we. They asked can we. The boundaries blurred between hope and hubris, between healing and control. And though the streets outside grew cleaner, inside the hospitals, the heart of modern medicine, a quiet arrogance took hold. To question a doctor was to question science. To question science was to question civilization itself. So no one questioned anything. People drank poison labeled as cure. They endured pain called progress. They obeyed authority dressed in white coats and Latin words. The public trusted completely, and because progress was not something you doubted. It was something you believed in. The irony was cruel. Science had replaced superstition, but the human need for faith had not disappeared. It had only changed shape. Where once they prayed to saints, now they prayed to scientists. Where once miracles came from heaven, now they came from laboratories. And in that devotion, the Victorians forgot the simplest truth of all, that progress is not pure. It is not gentle. It is not always right. Every step forward leaves a shadow. Every discovery carries a cost. And when faith in knowledge becomes blind, it stops being enlightenment and becomes illusion. The Victorians could not see it. To them, the age of medicine was a triumph, but beneath the shining hospitals and the journals full of theories, the same pattern repeated, the same blindness that had poisoned their patients, used their poor, and turned healing into harm. They believed they had mastered the body. But in truth, they had only learned how fragile it was, and how easily trust can be weaponized in the name of progress. In the glow of gaslight, London believed it had found the future. And maybe, in some ways, it had. The Victorians laid the foundations of modern medicine. They discovered anesthesia, sanitation, and the beginnings of true medical science. Their failures built our knowledge. Their mistakes saved generations they would never meet. But behind every discovery stood a question they never truly answered. How much harm is acceptable in the pursuit of healing? They wanted to understand life, but often forgot to respect it. They wanted to cure disease, but sometimes became the disease themselves. They believed knowledge made them gods. But knowledge without humility makes monsters. Today, their legacy still lingers in every hospital corridor, in every syringe and surgical light, in every promise of safe, proven, scientific. We live in a world born from their ambition. We trust medicine the way they once did, because to question it feels like stepping backward, back into the dark. But history has a way of whispering its warnings. It tells us that every age believes it has reached the truth, until it doesn't. That every cure begins as hope, until it becomes harm, and that progress, when worshipped, can blind even the brightest minds. The Victorians didn't set out to create an age of poison. They set out to heal. They set out to believe. They wanted to save lives, and in doing so, they changed the world. But they also left behind a lesson written in the quiet deaths of millions. That trust is fragile, and faith in progress must always be questioned, because medicine is not magic. It is power, and power must always answer to those it serves. So the next time you walk through a hospital, or open a bottle with a doctor's label, remember the city where it all began. Remember the gaslight, the gleaming bottles, the faith, the fear, and the quiet deaths that taught the world what healing truly costs. The Victorians believed they were saving the future. And perhaps in the end they did, just not in the way they imagined.